Robert Maxwell began his career as an interrogation officer for the British Army at the Bad Salzuflen headquarters in the British-occupied zone of Germany right after World War II, where he was assigned to interrogate German scientists in the hopes of recruiting them to the British side. The recruitment of German scientists was a key objective of the British, United States and Soviet Union following the defeat of Nazi Germany. The most notable recruitment and relocation of German scientists was known as Project Paperclip. Maxwell's role would provide key experience for his future work for MI6.
Maxwell's links with British intelligence were equally close. At MI6's headquarters in 1949, it was decided to finance his publishing venture as a cover to recruit Soviet scientists.
Well, Maxwell would be recruiting people, interrogating people, what their scientific views were or weren't, and basically, I think in those days, probably trying to get odd scientists, as it were, on our side.
Maxwell had been spotted by MI6 as an officer in post-war Berlin.
It was obvious that he'd been doing odd things for MI6, probably in Germany already, and he suggested that we should subsidize him to buy a bookshop.
This was Maxwell?
Or book business, yes.
So you picked him, Maxwell was to be your agent?
Yes, basically, yeah.
And you were subsidizing him?
Well, we subsidized him in the form of helping him buy his business.
Was it unusual for MI6 to do that with businessmen?
I don't know of any other case. I was certainly never involved in any other case of MI6 buying a business for anybody.
Maxwell used his contacts from authorities in the Allied occupation of Germany to become a managing director of the US and British distributor of Springer Verlag, a German publisher of scientific journals, which was taken over by the Allies. Springer Verlag then merged with the British Butterworth Publishing Company to form the Butterworth Springer Publishing Company. Maxwell then bought 3/4 of Butterworth Springer, while the remaining quarter was bought by fellow Jewish MI6 agent and scientific advisor Paul Rosbod. He then changed the company's name to Pergamon Press. The sale was brokered by another fellow Jew, an MI6 agent, prominent banker Charles Hambro, according to British author Stephen Dorrell. Hambro acted as the head of a British raw materials mission in Washington that also served as a cover for exchanging information and technology.
Maxwell had first visited Moscow in 1954, the height of the Cold War. Winning unprecedented access, he gained an extraordinary deal, publishing the books of top Soviet scientists. His success was blessed by the KGB.
He was evidently special. There was no other man of such scale as Maxwell. I know very well that these kind of continuing relations were not possible without direction of Central Committee and having no objections from KGB.
Maxwell boasted a close relationship with the KGB, as confirmed by its former chief.
Maxwell was a special person. He was received in our highest spheres.
To understand how Maxwell's role expanded and evolved in the USSR and Warsaw Pact countries, you have to understand what was going on in the world at the time.
The British Empire, the largest empire the world has ever known. For over 300 years, Britain ruled, its armies conquered, and its bankers proclaimed the might of its currency. But one day it all began to fall apart. One by one, countries declared their independence from Britain, and no amount of force could reverse the tide. As British elites saw their wealth, privileges, and empire disintegrate, they began to search for a new role in a changing world, and they found one in finance. In the days of the British Empire, the City of London was the world's biggest global financial centre.
The City of London was the kind of beating financial heart of the British Empire. The historians Kane and Hopkins call it the governor of the imperial engine. All these countries in the empire used to use the sterling currency, and the City of London was kind of the financier of this zone, not just inside the sterling zone, but outside the sterling zone as well.
As Britain's empire declined, so too did the City of London. Accountants and lawyers from London arrived in the Cayman Islands and other British dependencies and began to draft a set of financial secrecy laws and regulations. Because these jurisdictions' main selling point was secrecy, they were called secrecy jurisdictions.
What the Cayman Islands was doing was straightforwardly illegal activity. Drugs money was coming in huge quantities, tax evasion, whatever you wanted, you could have it.
The Bank of England was observing the developments from London and noted in a report marked secret, dated 11th of April 1969, "We need to be quite sure that the possible proliferation of trust companies, banks, etc., which in most cases would be no more than brass plates manipulating assets outside the islands, does not get out of hand. There is, of course, no objection to their providing bolt holes for non-residents, but we need to be sure that in so doing, opportunities are not created for the transfer of UK capital to the non-sterling area outside UK rules."
These small territories, the last remnants of the British Empire, which are still overseas territories today, they are still the last remnants of the British Empire. There are 14 of these overseas territories. 7 of them are bona fide tax havens, including the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands. Some of the biggest tax havens in the world today are still British.
With access to large amounts of offshore money, the euro market grew rapidly. By 1980, it had reached $500 billion. By 1988, $4.8 trillion. And by 1997, nearly 90% of all international loans were made through this market. The British Empire had sunk, leaving hardly a trace behind. But the City of London adapted and survived. In 1967, Michael Hudson was handed a memo by a former State Department employee.
A memo from the State Department urging that Chase Manhattan would take the lead in helping the United States become the Switzerland of the world, meaning the flight capital. The plan was to organize offshore banking centers in the Caribbean and elsewhere, and the hot money wouldn't come directly into Chase because that wouldn't be nice and very legal. What happened was that the Latin American criminals, other criminals, drug dealers, all sorts of organized crime, would put their money in the offshore Caribbean banks, and these offshore banks would then deposit the inflow in the head office.
By moving offshore dollars back into the United States, the US was able to stop the outflow of dollars and support the value of its currency. With the silent backing of the United States, Britain's offshore havens grew rapidly, and before long, the offshore system developed into the world's dominant international financial market.
With the movement towards financialisation in Great Britain and the United States, with the goal of capturing flight capital in the British sterling and US dollar zone respectively, the Anglo-American establishment actively sought inroads into areas of the world to capture this flight capital. The black market of the USSR, otherwise known as the secondary or underground economy, provided an untapped potential. Facilitating the ability to remove money from the USSR would also help to undermine the Soviet system, providing the ability and a safe haven for corrupt oligarchs to effectively loot their countries and hide their wealth. This, of course, would encourage more corruption, to the point that the Soviet system would eventually collapse into the mafia state it is today.
that I'd just move and live in Russia and work there and try and find a job. And I became a journalist writing about, you know, day-to-day events. And I suppose I'd had this kind of rather naive idea that what I'd be writing about would be the development of democracy. You know, it obviously, you know, Russia had been an authoritarian country forever. And yet in the 1990s, for the first time, it had sort of proper elections and proper media and kind of independent business people and all that. And it was exciting. And obviously, you know, spoiler, I didn't end up writing about the development of democracy. Just it must have been 3 weeks or so before I arrived, Vladimir Putin became prime minister, and he's been, you know, prime minister or president ever since. And gradually, at first, but increasingly quickly, I suppose, in the last few months, he's been stifling any kind of sign of, you know, civil society or freedom or democracy, you know, ruthlessly. So I ended up obviously writing about that because that was what was going on. But it's very difficult to, I'm in Russia or any other country in the former Soviet Union without coming across corruption. You get shaken down on the street by police officers or coming to the airport by customs officers or whoever. It's a fact of life. And it became increasingly clear to me that corruption was more than just a kind of street level thing. It was a phenomenon that really encompassed the whole state. You know, the state had been transformed into this extractive machine to take money from its own citizens. And that, you know, Putin essentially sits at the top of this pyramid of theft that's just taking away everything. And this very small group of all basically men around Putin have become incredibly wealthy. You know, the inequality in Russia is really off the charts. So, you know, that struck me after many years writing about Russia in the former Soviet, the most important thing that was happening, the fact that the government, though they posed as these kind of nationalists, had essentially transformed the state into a looting machine. And you don't need to start looking at that very long, realizing that they didn't do this on their own, right? Because where does the money end up? Well, the money ends up being spent on super yachts and mansions, you know, football clubs, you know, the general bling of the international super rich. And so, you know, I wrote a book about that called Moneyland, which was about this sort of global kleptocracy machine. But it struck me that there was this aspect of this phenomenon that I hadn't properly explored in Moneyland, which is the fact that whatever the scam or whatever the scheme, there is always, but always a British angle. It might be a shell company is British, which is, you know, the biggest ever money laundering scandal with $230 billion moved via Danske Bank, its Estonian branch, mostly hidden behind British shell companies. It might be a British lawyer, you know, arranging business affairs for an oligarch. It might be a mansion which has been sold to an oligarch where he lives or keeps his mistress. It might be a British school that's educating his children. It might be a British politician that's serving on the board or chairing the board of his company. Whatever it is, there's an oligarch. Somewhere there's a Brit. And that phenomenon struck me as sufficiently appalling from a British perspective, so sufficiently kind of interesting from a global of how the global criminal economy works, that it struck me as worth writing a book about. And it turned out to be a far more interesting, given it credit for. You know, this goes back further than I thought it did, and really is one of the keys standing how ruling classes of places like Nigeria or Russia, Azerbaijan, China, Argentina have really been able to, for so long, their countries with total impunity and steal this unbelievable sums of cash and stash it offshore and then spend it in property because they've had so much help, and primarily they've had help from people in the city of London in the UK.
"20 miles outside Sofia, on the road to the house that Maxwell bought, the grandest modern property in all Bulgaria. But to many ordinary people, this building, Bitsistra, is a symbol of the unholy partnership between Maxwell and the communists. The partners may have made millions, but now Bulgaria wants its money back.
I always was suspicious about the Maxwell operations in Bulgaria. It was clear that his operations was especially designed to use the communist corruption, the communist rulers' corruption, the communist interests in the Western world in order to get benefits.
Do you think his operations were illegal?
Yes.
The capitalist meets the communist, despots both.
Please take a seat, Mr. Maxwell.
Todor Zhivkov, who ran Bulgaria with a whip hand for 45 years, became close to Robert Maxwell during the 1980s. While others shied away from one of Eastern Europe's most hard-line regimes, Maxwell thrived. He did so by slavishly praising the dictator.
It's an invitation, Mr. President, if you'll continue popularity. Your popularity is as good as your health.
In 1981, Todor Zhivkov's great thoughts were published in English, courtesy of Robert Maxwell's Pergamon Press. This somewhat difficult book included a foreword by Maxwell himself. He writes of Bulgaria as a prosperous and happy nation under the leadership of the Communist Party and its General Secretary, Todor Zhivkov. It was a big lie, but Maxwell was now in business with the Communists, a relationship which was mutually beneficial.
Knowing what we know now in regards to the Anglo-American banking systems moving towards financialisation and the goal of capturing flight capital, along with the knowledge that Maxwell worked for British intelligence and the MI6 bankrolled Pergamon Press, we have a better understanding of what Maxwell was doing in Bulgaria. Maxwell, with his larger-than-life brazen personality, pandering charm offensive, combined with his powerful media empire, was able to crack the Iron Curtain.
The head of Bulgaria's Parliamentary Economic Commission is already demanding an explanation for another Maxwell deal. Arsen Michkovsky believes the communists used Maxwell to spirit millions of dollars abroad. According to Arsen Michkovsky, document 63 of Bulgaria's Foreign Currency Committee shows that on April the 24th, 1988, a group of ministers decided in secret to send money abroad by investing up to $200 million in shares through Britain. The middleman for the deal was Robert Maxwell. He was to get double the commission the Bulgarians normally paid. The reason, according to the document, was payment for the risk he was taking. The company through which the money was to be invested was the Maxwell-controlled London and Bishopsgate International Investment Management, PLC.
The decision was made to invest up to $200 million from the Bulgarian Strategic Currency Reserve. The first tranche of this investment amounted to $50 million. Provision was also made so that no further decision was needed for more investments of 50 or 100 million. What I can say for sure, and I have evidence to prove this, is that the initial 50 million was definitely invested. What happened to the rest of the money is difficult for me to say because all the documents are still being kept secret.
The deal says Maxwell was taking a risk, but what risk? What risk was he taking?
Mr. Maxwell, in fact, didn't take any kind of risk at all, because he was a major shareholder in the Bishopsgate Company, and because it wasn't his money he was investing anyway. And we know he was given this higher commission rate, twice the normal.
Revelations about Bitsistra and now the currency deals have left a cloud over all Maxwell's business affairs in Bulgaria. The problem is no one in the new government is sure what exactly he did own. His negotiations to buy a giant printing works from the communists were stopped when the old regime fell. But he'd already bought a major share in the Balkan film industry and in computing. Intriguingly, he also co-founded a new bank, which is reportedly being used by Bulgaria's leading arms trader. But equally interesting are the deals which apparently didn't come off. For example, his aborted plan to invest heavily in a resort on the Black Sea. He signed a large cheque for this, one of a number he apparently handed over for deals which never happened. So what was going on?
It's very strange, and we have information that some of the checks amounted of £1 million. And, of course, we are very suspicious, and we think that this is a way of laundering money from UK or from the United States and so on.
So you're saying that Maxwell signed cheques?
Yes.
For deals that were never done?
Yes.
What do you believe happened to that money?
I have no strict evidence because this is the bank secrecy, of course, as in other countries. But it seems to me that this money came in Bulgaria and then was transferred to another country or to another banking account, and that's the laundering of money.
Whatever the truth, it won't be found here in what were Communist Party headquarters. Security sources say that a mysterious fire just after the demise of the regime destroyed valuable evidence.